This is not breaking news. This is not a scandal. This is not about one person, one country, or one moment in time. What you're watching happen right now is quieter than a crisis and far more dangerous. It doesn't arrive with alarms. It doesn't announce itself. It moves through spreadsheets, budgets, and assumptions we stopped questioning years ago. For a long time, the system worked because everyone believed it did. That belief became the stabilizer. And now that stabilizer is weakening, not collapsing, weakening. That difference matters because systems don't fail when people panic. They fail when people keep going as if nothing has changed. If you've ever wondered why decisions that feel extreme suddenly feel normal, why extraordinary measures are described as maintenance, stay with me. You don't need to agree with what I'm about to show you. You just need to see it. And once you do, you'll start noticing the pressure everywhere. This isn't the story yet. This is the moment before it accelerates. What actually controls a system like this isn't ideology. It isn't elections. It isn't even leadership. It's obligation. Promises made in the past that must be paid in the present. Commitments layered so thick that stopping is no longer an option. Only continuing is, at a certain scale, the system stops asking whether something works. It only asks whether it can be funded. And when funding becomes the goal, everything else becomes flexible. Language changes first. Emergency becomes strategy. Temporary becomes structural. Maintenance replaces reform. This is where power quietly shifts. Away from voters, away from markets, toward the math, because numbers don't negotiate. They don't care about intent. They don't respond to speeches. And once the system reaches this point, every decision starts serving the same purpose. Keep the machine moving one more day. Not to grow, not to stabilize, just to prevent stopping. What looks like confidence from the outside is often momentum on the inside. And momentum, once it turns, doesn't ask permission. That's the frame. And now we need to talk about what changed without anyone noticing. The most dangerous changes never feel like change. They feel like continuity before the system rewarded patience. Saving worked. Stability was assumed. Time was an ally. Now, speed is rewarded. Leverage replaces caution. Movement matters more than direction. This didn't happen overnight. It happened through small adjustments that felt reasonable, then necessary, then invisible. Each adjustment solved a short-term problem. None of them solved the long-term one. The rules didn't break. They bent. Again and again, what used to be exceptional became routine. What used to require justification became automatic. And what used to be unthinkable became policy without debate. That's the shift, not a collapse, a normalization. Because when a system teaches you that tomorrow will always look like today, you stop preparing for anything else. And when preparation stops, dependence begins. This is how pressure accumulates without noise. This is how risk concentrates without warning. Nothing looks wrong yet. That's the point. But once you see the pattern of slow change, you start to realize something unsettling. The system isn't drifting. It's being carried, and what's carrying it is already under strain. Then something happens that feels sudden, not because it's unprecedented, but because it's visible. A decisive action, executed quickly, justified cleanly, explained as necessary. On paper, it looks strategic, contained, even efficient. But strip away the language, and what you're left with is simpler control of something real, something tangible, something that doesn't rely on trust. Moments like this are always framed as exceptions, as responses to instability elsewhere, as moves made to restore order. They are never described as what they actually are, symptoms. Because systems that are confident don't rush to secure collateral. They don't convert force into balance sheets. They don't need to. When a system starts doing that, it's not projecting strength. It's compensating. And here's the detail most people miss. This kind of move doesn't solve the underlying problem. It buys time. Time measured not in decades, but in margins. If this were truly stabilizing, it would reduce pressure. Instead, pressure keeps building just out of sight. If this feels like an isolated decision, pause. Watch what follows. Because what comes next tells you what stage this system is really in. Here's the mechanism most explanations avoid. When confidence weakens, the system looks for substitutes. Not reforms, substitutes. Trust is replaced with enforcement. Credibility with collateral. Future promises with present control. This is how the machine keeps running. Value no longer comes from what the system produces. It comes from what it can still claim. Extract, secure. The benefits are immediate. They always are. Balance sheets look healthier. Pressure eases just enough. Narratives regain their footing. But the cost doesn't disappear. It moves. Those closest to the asset are protected. Those furthest away absorb the loss slowly, quietly, invisibly. This is the transfer, not dramatic, not sudden, distributed over time. And because it's distributed, it's tolerated. The system survives by shifting strain outward, across borders, across classes, across years. That's why this phase lasts longer than expected, and why it feels deceptively stable. But every substitution has a limit. And once the supply of substitutes runs thin, the system is forced to reveal what it's been avoiding. That's when efficiency turns into urgency. And urgency doesn't negotiate. This is where the pace changes. Decisions come faster. Explanations get shorter. Reversals stop being rare. You'll notice it first in the tone. Confidence without detail, certainty without margin. Numbers start moving in ways that feel disconnected from reality. Costs rise, revenues lag. Adjustments are announced, then quietly revised. Again and again. Nothing breaks all at once. Instead, everything feels tighter, less forgiving. Institutions that once acted independently begin moving in sync, not by design, by necessity. There's less room to maneuver, less tolerance for delay, less appetite for debate, because delay becomes expensive. And debate introduces risk. So choices narrow. What used to be policy becomes reflex. What used to be caution becomes hesitation. And hesitation at this stage is treated as threat. From the outside, this still looks like control. Inside the system, it feels like compression, pressure building, options collapsing. And here's the part no one says out loud. Once a system reaches this tempo, slowing it down becomes harder than speeding it up. That's not a warning. That's physics, and it's about to matter. This is where it reaches you, not as a headline, not as a policy, as friction. Things you planned for no longer line up. Costs change between decision and payment. Safety margins shrink without explanation. You start adjusting without realizing why. Waiting less, committing faster, holding on to things that used to feel temporary. The system hasn't told you anything is wrong. It doesn't need to. It teaches you through pressure. You're asked to be flexible, then resilient, then realistic. And each step sounds reasonable until you notice how much of the adjustment is yours. This is how impact is distributed. Not evenly, not loudly. Those closest to the flow feel it last. Those furthest away feel it first. And that gap matters. Because by the time the effects are undeniable, the choices that mattered are already behind you. If you felt that quiet sense of acceleration, that feeling, that standing still now, requires effort. You're not imagining it. That's the system asking for participation, not consent, participation. And once participation becomes mandatory, opt-outs start disappearing. This is where attention matters, because what's coming next doesn't arrive locally. Pressure like this doesn't stay contained. Systems this large don't fail inward. They transmit. What begins as adjustment in one place shows up as distortion somewhere else. Trade routes reprice. Settlements change terms. Agreements quietly add alternatives. not because anyone announces a break, but because dependence becomes a liability. You can see it in the way transactions are routed, in the way reserves are diversified, in the way partnerships start hedging instead of committing. None of this looks dramatic on its own. That's why it works. The system still functions, flows continue, confidence is performed, but the structure underneath is changing shape. Redundancy replaces loyalty. Optionality replaces trust. And once that shift begins, it's hard to reverse because no one wants to be last to adjust. No one wants to be holding exposure when the rules finally change. So movement accelerates quietly across borders, across markets, across time zones. This isn't coordination, it's convergence. And convergence like this doesn't signal collapse. It signals preparation for something that hasn't arrived yet, but will, from here, the future doesn't narrow to one outcome. It splits 3 paths, all plausible, all expensive. The first is adjustment, slow recalibration, managed pressure, promises quietly restructured rather than broken. This path preserves form, not comfort. It works only if confidence holds long enough to make change survivable. The second is erosion. No single breaking point, just less purchasing power each year. More volatility, more exceptions. Stability that exists in name only. This path feels familiar until you realize how much ground it's taken. The third is rupture, a moment when confidence moves faster than control. Markets don't wait. They reprice abruptly. This is the path systems try hardest to avoid, and the one history shows arrives when delay goes too far. None of these paths announce themselves in advance. They emerge from the same conditions, the same pressures, the same math. And here's the part that matters most. The system doesn't choose the path. Participants do, individually, quietly, in aggregate, which means the future is already forming. Not tomorrow, now. You just can't see the shape yet. Nothing about this ends cleanly. There is no final announcement. No moment when someone steps forward and explains what changed. Systems like this resolve the way they fail, gradually. Then suddenly, what you've been watching isn't a crisis. It's a reveal of constraints that were always there, of assumptions that no longer hold, of a structure that worked until it didn't. And the most dangerous part is not what breaks, it's what continues, because continuity convinces people there's still time. And time, in moments like this, is never evenly distributed. Some will adapt early, quietly, without certainty. Others will wait for clarity that never arrives. This isn't about fear. It's about attention. If you want to understand what happens before systems cross invisible lines, stay here, because the next signals won't look like warnings. They'll look like routine. And once routine becomes irreversible, the window closes without notice. This story isn't finished. It's entering its decisive phase. If you want to see what to watch next before it becomes obvious, that's where we're going. And you won't want to arrive late.